Eliza Hart had always believed in systems, algorithms, equations, logic trees. They made sense in ways people didn't, but nothing in her meticulously structured world could have prepared her for the day it all unraveled. After 15 years of shaping the backbone of Tech Vantage's AI division, she was summoned, unannounced, to the glass-walled conference room on the 37th floor. The morning skyline behind her was a blur of light and motion, but inside the room, everything felt static. Marjorie Caldwell, Vice President of Strategy, sat across from her, posture crisp, eyes sharp, smile thin and manufactured. Next to her, Denise from HR held a tablet close to her chest like a shield. "Eliza," Marjorie said, each syllable smooth, rehearsed. "We're restructuring your position." The words landed without emotion, like a statement about the weather. Eliza blinked, trying to parse the meaning beneath the corporate gloss. "I'm sorry?" "You've been invaluable to our growth," Marjorie continued. "But your role, as it currently exists, is being phased out. We're realigning resources to fit our new strategic direction." That word, direction, hung in the air like a thinly veiled dismissal. It was corporate shorthand for, "You're no longer part of the plan." Eliza's mind raced. "What about Project Polaris?" she asked, her voice calm despite the knot forming in her chest. "It's in final testing. The infrastructure integration models." Denise cut in gently, like someone trying to let down a friend at a funeral. "Polaris has been reassigned. As of this week, the intellectual property is retained solely by Tech Vantage." Eliza went still. Polaris wasn't just a project. It was her life's work. A revolutionary predictive algorithm designed to optimize large-scale systems, urban infrastructure, energy grids, emergency response. It had the potential to change how cities lived and breathed. She hadn't merely designed it, she had dreamed it into being. Every line of code bore her imprint. And now they were taking it, repackaging it, without her. "We expect full documentation transferred by Friday," Marjorie said, standing to signal the conversation was over. Eliza rose slowly, her gaze fixed and unblinking. "You're replacing me with someone cheaper." Neither woman denied it, neither even shifted in their seats. She left the room with quiet dignity. No outbursts, no scene. Just the click of her heels against the polished floor and the hollow ring of erasure. That evening, she returned to her office. No one greeted her. No farewell banner, no cheap grocery store cake with cursive icing. Just her and the silence. She packed alone. Cardboard boxes filled with old research papers, sticky notes of late-night ideas, and 27 folders labeled with breakthroughs and code revisions. She touched the framed photo of the Polaris prototype, then placed it face down in the bottom of a box. As she walked past the security desk, badge turned in, a young engineer named Ben caught up to her, slightly breathless. "Dr. Hart," he said, eyes wide behind round glasses. "We heard. I just wanted to say, working on Polaris with you, it changed how I think about AI, about purpose." Eliza offered a tired smile. "Then don't forget it," she said softly. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Her reflection stared back, shoulders set, eyes steady, jaw clenched not in grief, but in decision. She wasn't finished. Not even close. Eliza didn't waste time mourning. Just days after leaving Tech Vantage, she had converted the sun-drenched loft of her apartment into a temporary command center. On the desk, an aging laptop, piles of annotated research papers, and a whiteboard where she had scrawled in bold blue marker, "This is not starting over. This is starting smarter." She couldn't retrieve Polaris, but she had memory, she had vision, and she had a reason. From scratch, Eliza began rebuilding. Not copying, not cloning, but reimagining. A new system born from lessons learned, smarter, safer, more transparent, one that could predict, guide, and assist without ever exploiting or dominating, an AI that wouldn't replace people but elevate them. She called it Polaris 2.0. Each morning she rose before dawn, made coffee, and opened her laptop before the sunlight touched the window pane. Her workdays blurred into nights. The lines of code flowed like constellations across her screen, structured, precise, limitless. Late one night, while refining the ethical feedback loop in Polaris 2.0's neural core, a familiar name popped up in her inbox: Samir Lin. Samir had once been a colleague, a systems analyst with a sharp mind and a sharper conscience. He'd left Tech Vantage 2 years prior to start his own boutique consultancy focused on ethical AI. His email was brief. "Heard what happened. They're fools. If you're rebuilding Polaris, I want in. No strings, no pressure, just support. Eliza replied with a single link, a private repository containing the foundational structure of Polaris 2.0. 3 hours later, her phone rang. "You're not just rebuilding," Samir said, breathless. "You're outpacing everything on the market." Within weeks, Eliza and Sam had assembled a tiny team, 3 engineers, a tech ethicist, and a former federal systems coder. No office, no perks, just a shared mission to build a predictive AI system that was not only intelligent but transparent and accountable. They launched a startup, Novadine. Eliza refused all venture capital offers. "They'll want control," she warned. "We're not building this to sell. We're building this to shift the foundation." Sam nodded. "Then we grow slow, but we grow right." Polaris 2.0 evolved rapidly. Each test yielded cleaner, sharper results. More impressively, it could explain its decisions, every prediction accompanied by a rationale in plain language. They tested it in simulated disaster response, city traffic flow optimization, energy demand modeling. The system didn't just perform well, it outperformed legacy systems by wide margins and offered explanations even policymakers could understand. "No more black box," Eliza said during a team meeting. "We're turning the lights on." Word began to spread. A technical blog wrote a short feature. Academics started sharing it on forums. Experts began referring to Polaris 2.0 as the first truly ethical deep learning model. One magazine called Eliza the ousted architect who rebuilt the future in her living room. She chuckled when she read that line. Then came the email from Tech Vantage. Marjorie Caldwell wanted to explore potential collaboration. Eliza stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she typed her reply. "Thanks for reaching out. I'm busy building something you'll never be able to control. It's called the future." Polaris 2.0 was more than a project. It was a manifesto. A declaration that technology could be principled, that power could be distributed, that AI didn't have to be feared. It just had to be made right. Most importantly, it was proof that Eliza Hart was not done. She wasn't out for revenge. She was out to redefine the rules. The tipping point came quietly. It wasn't a news headline or viral moment. It was a pilot test. Polaris 2.0 had been selected by the city of Brookhaven to model and optimize their emergency response grid. The project was small, almost forgettable to outsiders, a mid-sized city with a modest infrastructure budget, plagued by years of slow 911 response times and inefficient resource allocation. But for Eliza and her team, it was the first real-world proving ground, a chance to show what their work could do under pressure. They configured Polaris 2.0 to track and predict daily patterns. Call volume surges, peak congestion routes, weather disruptions, and medical dispatch overlaps. In just 1 month, the results were staggering. Response times dropped by 27%. Ambulance deployment improved. Power outages during a freak lightning storm were rerouted within seconds. And then came the moment Eliza would never forget. During a city council meeting, the fire chief, a no-nonsense man named Lieutenant Reyes, stood at the podium and said, "For the first time in 20 years, we weren't reacting. We were ready." The room had gone silent. Eliza, watching the live stream from her apartment, had felt a sharp sting behind her eyes. Not pride. Something quieter, deeper. Validation. Soon, other municipalities came calling. A coastal town in Oregon wanted to model tsunami evacuation paths. A major hospital system in Chicago requested a demo to streamline patient flow. Even a private disaster relief group asked about licensing the platform for hurricane response logistics. Eliza refused to rush. She insisted every new deployment be tested in stages, with full documentation and public oversight. Transparency wasn't just a feature, it was the foundation, and people noticed. Polaris 2.0 was no longer just a clever tool. It was becoming a symbol, a proof of concept that AI didn't have to be opaque or manipulative. It could be built with integrity. Yet with each new success, Eliza felt something tighten in her chest. She was no longer operating in the shadows. Her name, once buried in the footnotes of corporate press releases, was now appearing on panels, podcasts, and industry reports. Invitations rolled in from think tanks, governments, academic institutions. She declined most of them. "I didn't build this to become a personality," she told Sam one evening. "I built it so the next person like me doesn't have to start from scratch." Sam smiled. Still, you're a hell of a symbol. Then came the lawsuit. Tech Vantage filed a formal IP infringement complaint claiming that Polaris 2.0 was a derivative of proprietary assets Eliza had developed while under their employment. The news broke across major outlets within hours. The irony was maddening. The same company that had discarded her was now trying to claim ownership of her comeback. Their legal filing argued that Polaris 2.0's architecture bore substantial similarity to the original Polaris framework. Their evidence: a handful of structural overlaps, basic organizational schemas that were common across all advanced predictive systems. But they didn't anticipate what Eliza had done differently. Unlike Polaris 1.0, which had operated as a closed system, Polaris 2.0 was open source. Every line of code was documented. Every algorithmic choice was annotated and publicly available. It wasn't just clean. It was transparent to a fault. Sam's voice cracked with excitement as he briefed the legal team. They're swinging at a ghost. The moment this goes to court, we don't just win. We show the world what ethical AI looks like in practice. But Eliza remained calm. She didn't want to fight. She wanted a demonstration. So at the peak of the media frenzy, she held a press conference, not in a hotel ballroom or government hall. She stood in front of a whiteboard in Novadine's modest shared office space and walked reporters through Polaris 2.0's codebase, line by line. "This isn't a product I hoard," she said. "This is a system I share." The clip went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was so wildly uncorporate. The case was dropped within a week. But the moment stuck with Eliza, because underneath the victory, she saw what came next. Companies weren't just watching. They were reacting. Some were beginning to market their AI models as transparent, even if they weren't. Others slapped ethics labels on black box systems they refused to open. It wasn't just a battle of technology anymore. It was a battle of narrative. And Eliza knew, if she didn't act fast, Polaris 2.0 would be swallowed by the very forces it was built to challenge. So, she made a decision. Novadine would no longer be a small research lab. It would become a movement. They began partnering with universities, releasing curriculum modules built on Polaris 2.0. They worked with grassroots organizations to bring AI literacy to underserved communities. And they launched a certification framework, an open, decentralized process that would verify whether any predictive system met core ethical standards. "Not just AI that works," Eliza said in the announcement video. "AI that earns trust." It was a gamble. One that would stretch their resources and exhaust the team. But she knew the stakes. Polaris 2.0 wasn't just software anymore. It was a challenge to the industry, to the world, to the future. And Eliza Hart was standing at the front of it, no longer just building algorithms, but rewriting the terms of power. As Novadine's impact grew, so did its scrutiny. At first, Eliza welcomed it. Healthy skepticism was part of progress, and she encouraged critique, real critique, from academics, engineers, city planners. Polaris 2.0 had nothing to hide. Its design was meant to invite dialogue. But what came next wasn't dialogue. It was distortion. Tech Vantage may have lost the lawsuit, but they hadn't forgotten the embarrassment. Over the next several months, they launched an aggressive campaign to reposition themselves as the global leaders in ethical predictive intelligence. The centerpiece of their rebranding was a new system, VeriMind, pitched as a more scalable and business-friendly alternative to Polaris 2.0. To the uninformed eye, VeriMind looked clean, smart, trustworthy. But behind the interface, Eliza saw it clearly. A polished, closed-source platform dressed up in ethical language. There were no explanations for decisions, no community input, no transparency beyond what their PR team allowed. Still, corporations flocked to it because VeriMind was simple to implement and came with all the right buzzwords: equity-aware, adaptive learning, governance-ready. They knew how to sell a story, even if it wasn't true. Sam called it ethics theater. Eliza called it dangerous. "They're not building tools," she said one night as they sat reviewing case studies. "They're building illusions of safety, systems people trust blindly because they're told to." And the scariest part? VeriMind worked, technically. It could optimize traffic, manage logistics, and predict outcomes. But unlike Polaris 2.0, it couldn't explain why. And that, Eliza believed, was the crack where corruption would creep in. Amid this growing tension, Novadine was invited to a global innovation summit in Berlin. The event would bring together the biggest names in AI, governance, and tech regulation. Eliza hesitated. It smelled of spectacle, but Sam convinced her. "They're going to tell your story without you," he warned. "Wouldn't you rather write the narrative yourself?" So Eliza went. She didn't wear a suit. She didn't bring a slideshow. She stood on stage in a simple black shirt and jeans, flanked by CEOs in sharp blazers and government officials with plastic smiles. And when her turn came, she said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then she asked, "How many of you could explain what your AI system does? Not in code, not in buzzwords, but in plain English your mother could understand." The room shifted. Eliza didn't pitch. She taught. She walked them through a real-world scenario, a citywide power failure, using Polaris 2.0's live interface. She showed how it made decisions, how it self-audited, how citizens could challenge its outcomes in real time. "This isn't a black box," she said. "It's a glass box. Because if people are going to trust machines with real-world consequences, they deserve to see what's inside." Applause followed, but not from everyone. Later that evening, at a private dinner, a prominent investor pulled her aside. "You're brilliant," he said, "but you're idealistic. Transparency slows down adoption. Most clients don't care how it works. They just want results." Eliza sipped her wine, then set it down gently. "Then they don't deserve the power that comes with it." Back home, something shifted. The attention after the summit had boosted Novadine's visibility, but also its vulnerability. Suddenly, the startup was no longer a quiet outlier. It was competition. And competition in the tech world invites sabotage. They began receiving strange reports. Test environments corrupted, Git repositories cloned, smear campaigns launched online claiming Polaris 2.0's results were manipulated or biased. Anonymous accounts shared selectively edited footage from internal demos. For a brief moment, Eliza felt the old panic rise, the kind she hadn't felt since leaving Tech Vantage. The fear of being erased. Again. But she was no longer that woman. This time, she didn't shrink back. She leaned in. Novadine published a full transparency report open to the public, detailing every test, every failure, every algorithmic revision since Polaris 2.0's inception. They partnered with the University Ethics Board to independently audit their decision-making engine. The verdict was clear. Polaris 2.0 wasn't perfect, but it was accountable, and no smear campaign could match that level of openness. Then came an unexpected call from Dr. Anna Lark, a senior systems coordinator at the United Nations. "I've been following your work," she said. "We're forming a new coalition on AI for crisis response. We need a framework that works, and we believe Polaris 2.0 might be the foundation." Eliza hesitated. "We're not designed for diplomacy. We're engineers." Dr. Lark laughed. "Then we'll translate. But the world doesn't need more tools. It needs trustworthy ones." It was a turning point. Novadine wasn't just rebuilding AI. They were rebuilding credibility in a world increasingly ruled by machines that people didn't understand and didn't question. And Eliza? She was no longer just defending what she'd built. She was defining what would come next. By the time winter came, Eliza Hart had stopped checking the numbers. Polaris 2.0 had now been adopted in 12 cities, 5 major hospitals, and 3 disaster zones. The system had guided evacuations in a wildfire outbreak, rerouted supply chains during a flood in Jakarta, and even helped prevent a major grid failure during a heat wave in Arizona. The metrics were powerful, but they weren't what kept her going. What drove her now was the people. The mother who wrote to say that the ambulance reached her son in under 4 minutes because of Polaris. The mayor of a small Peruvian town who'd used the open-source toolkit to rewire their emergency response network. A teacher in New Delhi who emailed a photo of her students learning how AI decisions are made using a demo Eliza had published online. They were small moments, quiet ones. But to Eliza, they were everything Polaris had been meant to be. Still, the world wasn't getting quieter. Tech Vantage had launched VeriMind 3.0, now fully integrated with police precincts and predictive law enforcement modules. Eliza's inbox flooded with questions from activists and journalists. Can predictive AI be fair when it's used in policing? Does VeriMind allow for citizen appeals? Why doesn't Novadine build law enforcement models too? She responded carefully, publicly, firmly. "We don't build systems to punish," she said in one interview. "We build systems to protect." But that line, drawn clearly in her mind, became harder to defend when a tragedy hit closer to home. It was a school shooting, 2 blocks from Novadine's office. The response was fast. Polaris 2.0 had already mapped emergency routes in the area, and it minimized casualties. But one life lost was too many. The media swarmed. Some called Polaris a hero. Others accused it of failing to predict the unpreventable. Eliza didn't take the bait, but something changed in her afterward. She began to wonder, was protection enough, or did responsibility demand more? Novadine had always refused to enter predictive law enforcement or surveillance tech. The risks were too high, the biases too deeply embedded. But now, standing in front of that school's makeshift memorial, she realized something. Abstaining wasn't the same as solving. So she called a team meeting. "We've spent years saying what we won't build," she told them. "Now I want to talk about what we must." The room was silent. Then Sam leaned forward. "You're talking about auditing the systems that already exist?" She nodded. "Yes, not replacing Verimind, exposing it." What followed was the most radical phase of Novadine's journey. They launched Project Lucent, a collaborative initiative designed to audit, stress test, and publicly evaluate proprietary AI systems used in high-stakes decision-making. Law enforcement, immigration, welfare eligibility, parole review, wherever an algorithm touched a life, Lucent would shine a light on how it worked or didn't. It wasn't espionage. It was accountability. They built partnerships with investigative journalists, civil liberties groups, and whistleblowers. They created public guides that helped individuals request explanations from opaque AI systems. And most daring of all, they built a browser tool that allowed anyone to simulate the output of Verimind based on input data, comparing it to Polaris 2.0. The differences were staggering. Polaris adjusted its weightings in real time, flagged uncertainty, and explained rationale. Verimind offered a single outcome, with no visibility into how it was reached. Predictably, backlash followed. Tech Vantage filed a cease and desist. The lawsuit claimed that Project Lucent was defamatory, malicious, and a threat to technological advancement. The media lit up again. But this time, something shifted. People sided with Novadine. Thousands of users posted their own Lucent logs, screenshots showing where Verimind had denied benefits, flagged innocent individuals, or contradicted itself. The hashtag #ShowYourSystem began trending globally. Governments took notice. The European Union proposed a bill requiring explainability standards for all public sector AI. A U.S. senator introduced a right to algorithmic appeal law. Suddenly, accountability wasn't just Eliza's crusade. It was policy. The pressure wore on her. She began sleeping in her office again. The same couch she'd crashed on during Polaris 2.0's earliest nights. Sam worried, but she waved him off. "I can rest later," she told him. "Right now, people are listening." Then, on a rainy Thursday, something happened that she hadn't prepared for. A letter arrived. Not an email, not a press inquiry, but a real envelope, handwritten. It was from Jonah Merritt, her old supervisor. "I was wrong," it read. "You didn't just build a system, you built a standard, and I wasn't brave enough to do that." She reread the note 3 times. Then she folded it and placed it in the drawer beside her laptop. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Even those who had tried to erase her were now following her lead. That night, she walked to the rooftop. The city was humming. Beneath her, buses moved along routes optimized by Polaris. Hospitals pulsed with real-time coordination. Even the blinking grid of traffic lights seemed to nod in rhythm with what she and her team had built. Sam joined her. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't pushed back?" he asked. Eliza didn't answer at first. Then she smiled. "No. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't started over." 6 years after she walked away from Tech Vantage, Eliza Hart stood before the United Nations Assembly in Geneva. Behind her, on the digital display, flickered a new name: the Algorithmic Justice Accord. It wasn't a product. It wasn't even a technology. It was a framework. A global agreement, co-authored by Novadine and 28 countries, outlining minimum standards for transparency, explainability, and ethical oversight in AI systems used in governance and critical infrastructure. And Eliza, once written off as a disgruntled engineer, was now one of its architects. She wore the same style she always had, simple dark trousers, hair pulled back, no frills, but the room no longer looked through her. When she walked to the podium, the room quieted, not because of the spotlight, but because of what she represented. She began the speech the same way she'd started the Polaris 2.0 codebase. Assume the user is human, always. Then she spoke, not of machines, but of accountability, of the need for systems that answer to the people they serve, of the danger of power without transparency, of how a misjudged algorithm had once ended her career, only to become the seed of a new kind of integrity. She closed with a phrase that echoed throughout the chamber. We built these tools. We must also build the guardrails. The hall erupted in applause, not because she was polished, but because she was right. After Geneva, things didn't slow down. Novadine expanded, not into profit-hungry growth, but into impact-centered partnerships. They launched open-source education programs in underserved regions, helped rewrite procurement contracts to include ethical requirements, and created toolkits that let local governments assess AI vendors before buying their tech. But for Eliza, the change was internal. She no longer felt like she was fighting just to survive. Now, she was choosing how to lead. Sam moved into a new role, Director of Applied Civic AI, and began mentoring a new generation of engineers. Mira, once a junior dev, now headed Novadine's Fairness and Systems Division. The team had grown, not in size, but in clarity. They weren't just builders, they were custodians. Then, one day, Eliza received an invitation she hadn't expected, a keynote at Tech Vantage's annual conference. At first, she laughed, then she reread the letter. It was signed by the new CEO, a woman named Nadine Chowdhury, who had taken over after Jonah Merritt resigned during an internal ethics scandal 2 years prior. Nadine's note was brief, but sincere. We can't rewrite history, but we're trying to write a better future. Your story deserves space in that conversation. Eliza thought about it for weeks. Then she said yes. The event was held at the same glass tower in San Francisco where she had once been escorted out by security. The auditorium was sleek, high-tech, slightly over-designed, just as she remembered. But the people were different. Younger, more diverse, open-eyed. When she walked on stage, she didn't speak with bitterness. She spoke with clarity. I didn't come here to settle scores, she said. I came here because accountability isn't a scar. It's a standard. She shared her journey, not as a redemption arc, but as a case study in what's possible when the people most harmed by a system are given the tools to remake it. And at the end, something remarkable happened. No one clapped out of politeness. They stood, and clapped because they believed. Later that year, Polaris 3.0 was released. This time, it wasn't just Eliza's code. It was the result of 5 years of open collaboration. Ethicists, social workers, teachers, engineers, even artists contributing to its design. It had been translated into 32 languages. Its architecture was modular, so small communities could adopt only the parts they needed. And in its very first run, Polaris 3.0 coordinated food delivery across a conflict zone without a single lost shipment. Eliza watched the operation unfold on a monitor in Novadine's HQ, tears in her eyes, not from pride, but from peace. This was what she'd hoped for, not glory, justice. She didn't retire. That was never the plan. But she stepped back, just enough to let others lead. She took long walks, reconnected with her sister, taught seminars quietly at the local university under her mother's last name, Pierce, so her students wouldn't be intimidated by her legacy. One spring afternoon, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a book. The title read, The Algorithm She Built, Systems for a Transparent Tomorrow. It wasn't authored by her, but by a young journalist who had compiled her story, interviews, and open-source writings. She smiled as she read the first line. This isn't a story about code. It's a story about refusal, the refusal to disappear. Years from now, people would still debate the technical merits of Polaris 2.0 and Lucent and the Accord. Scholars would dissect the lines of code, the system architecture, the audit trail schemas. But that wasn't the legacy Eliza left. Her legacy was a question. A single, quiet question that echoed beyond the walls of any one company, courtroom, or conference stage. Who does the system serve? And for the first time in a long time, the world had an answer.